This week in lab, we'll be going over CVA2, and we'll look at the anatomy of a bird as well as its respiratory system. The unique thing about birds is that they have a very efficient double respiratory system, or in other words, 2 respiratory cycles are required to move air through their trachea, air sacs, and lungs before it exits their body. On page 3 of your lab handout, you will see 4 drawings that resemble what I have here on the screen. This diagram represents the respiratory system. Here we have the trachea. Here is the posterior air sac. Here are the lungs. And here is the anterior air sac. When a bird takes in its first inhale, the air sacs will expand, and most of the air will travel through the trachea and stay in the posterior air sac, but some will leak into the lungs. When a bird takes its first exhale, body muscles are used to compress the air sacs, and all of the air will move from the posterior air sac and the lungs fully into all of the lungs. And this is where gas exchange occurs. Oxygenated air will diffuse across the surface of the lungs and into the bloodstream. Now, when the bird takes its second inhale, a new volume of air, be represented by blue, will travel through the trachea. Most will stay in the posterior air sac, but some will leak into the lungs. Meanwhile, the first volume of air will be pushed from the lungs and into the anterior air sac. And keep in mind, at this point, the air sacs will once again expand. And finally, when the bird takes its second exhale, the air sacs will compress. The first volume of air will leave the lungs and the anterior air sac. It'll exit the body, and the second volume of air will be pushed out of the posterior air sac and out of the lungs, all the way to fill up the rest of the lungs. So some things to keep in mind is that birds use up a lot of energy to fly. Therefore, they require a lot of oxygen for their metabolic processes. This unidirectional flow of air is on a cycle, so it's always repeating and there's a constant oxygen absorption. If you think about it, the only time you would see this situation up here is when the bird takes in its very first volume of air. To better understand this double respiratory system, the joke we like to make is that if a bird were to smoke, it must inhale and exhale 2 times before smoke exits its body. Be sure to label the diagram in your handout with the name of these structures and which shaded portions are the first or second inhale or exhale so you can study from it for your quiz and final lab practical.